Hello YouTube, sorry it's been a minute, I've been really busy, but I'm back with another camera comparison, and today we've got two of the hottest big screen foldables on the market. That's the Samsung Galaxy Z Fold 6 and the Vivo X Fold 3 Pro. That's the global version of the Vivo, and we're going to put the cameras head to head. I have a feeling I know which one is going to take the best photos and videos, but I don't know for sure, so there's only one way to find out. And we'll get into that right now. Okay, starting with the front-facing cameras of these two phones. And when I say front-facing cameras, I mean the selfie camera on the cover screen. There's a lot of different cameras on these phones. The Vivo's recording at 1080p 30 frames per second. It can do 1080p 60 at maximum, whereas the Samsung's at 4K 30 and it can do 4K 60. We're using the built-in mics. It's a very sunny day, but it's pretty windy too. So yeah, let me know how the wind noise sounds. And we will switch over to the interior selfie cameras. Okay, now we're using both selfie cameras on the fold-out flippy screens. Both are at 1080p 30. Neither of these can do 4K. The Samsung's an under-display selfie camera with only a 4 megapixel resolution. So it's probably going to look a lot worse, whereas the specs of the Vivo exactly match the one on the front-facing camera. It's just a regular punch-hole selfie camera. So yeah, here's how it looks when I'm backlit. Here's how it looks facing the sun. Which one's doing better? Of course, with these being foldable phones, you can use the rear cameras to take a selfie or a selfie video like I am right now. And that's how that looks. We're on the main camera of each at 4K 30 right now. But I can obviously switch to the ultra wide, get a nice wide field of view, or we can punch in and use the telephoto cameras for an extremely close-up field of view. I've got the phones on a tripod at the minute, so I can hold it pretty far away from myself and get a pretty decent field of view with the One X camera. But I think a lot of the time people might choose to use the ultra wide because you can hold it at a more comfortable position, and I believe both have autofocus. Vivo does for sure. But yeah, that's what that looks like. This is a stabilization test on the rear cameras. We're on the ultra wide on both. Both say they're 0.6x ultra wide, but you can see that the Samsung's clearly a lot wider, at least in video mode. This is walking along at a normal pace, and here's what it looks like when I give it a bit of a jog. Now, this is the main cameras of each. Again, walking along at a leisurely pace, and if I have a bit of a jog, that's how those cameras do. Finally, 3x telephoto of each. Here's how it looks when I'm standing still. Here's what it looks like walking at a normal pace. And here's how it is with a bit of a jog. Okay, this is the main rear camera of each. Just checking how well it tracks my face as I move close to the camera and further back. And if I leave the frame and come back in, how well does it do with the focus? Right, so normally I compare the portrait video mode, cinematic portrait on the Vivo, between these two phones, but the Samsung Galaxy Z Fold 6 doesn't seem to have it, but it does have auto framing, which is what I've turned on now. So it should follow me around as I move about the frame. That might be an interesting look. Whereas you get the blur effects like you'd expect with the Vivo. It's on max blur strength, so how good of a job is it doing cutting me out? Let me know which you prefer. Alright, quick video zoom test. Starting on the ultra wide, and as I said before, the Samsung's clearly a bit wider on the ultra wide. Now we'll zoom in on the church. You've seen this church many times, but I think it kind of helps get a frame of reference how all the other different phones perform. That's the main. Now this is the 3X. There's a 6X button on the Vivo, but I have to slide with the Samsung, and it will give me a maximum of 12 times zoom, whereas the Vivo goes to a maximum of 10 times in video mode. That is lined up well enough, just about. Back out to the main and back out to the ultra wide. Alright, we're back with the crocheted Archer guy. We're on the main camera of each, and we're going to do a macro to infinity focus pulling test. I can see that Vivo's a lot more zoomed in by default, and it has a much shallower depth of field because it's a larger sensor, but it's also having trouble focusing. I'm not tapping to focus, I'm just holding the phones like you normally would. Yeah, Vivo's definitely pulsing to and from our subject. Doing a bit better now. So there's macro, there's infinity, there's macro, there's infinity. Yeah, Vivo definitely struggles. Can help it out a bit by getting closer, but that's not ideal. Let's do the same test with the telephotos. So there's macro, there's infinity, there's macro. Seems like Vivo does a better job with the telephoto. And if you're wondering how close you can get with each, let's test that now. It's pretty close. About there with the Samsung. About there with the Vivo. Vivo definitely gets closer on the telephoto lens. Okay, pretty dark now. We're on the cover selfie cameras of each. Vivo's again at 1080p 30, Samsung's at 4K 30, and this is how it looks in the dark. Now these are the interior selfie cameras, which is why Samsung looks like a potato. Both are at 1080p 30. Here's how these look in the dark. These are quite hard to hold in rear HD selfie mode, but this is the main camera of each in the dark. Obviously it's going to look a lot better than either of the little selfie cameras do. Okay, so just a quick note, that error with the Vivo happened more than once to me. I think it's something I need to patch out. Basically, if you're using the selfie camera on the interior display and then you switch to the rear main camera and try and use that as a selfie camera, it'll sometimes use the ultra wide sensor rather than the main sensor, even though it says it's the one-time sensor. So if you're trying to take a selfie with the rear camera and it looks like crap, then it might be that. You can just close the camera app, reopen it, it should be fine. But yeah, I think that's something Vivo needs to patch. I'm sure they will. The Vivo X Fold 3 Pro has only just come out globally, so there'll be plenty of firmware updates in the near future. But watch out for that. And if you use the ultra wide at night, that's how that looks. Nighttime video zoom test. We're on the ultra wide right now. Switching to the main lens of each. Now the 3X. Go to 6X on the Vivo. Have to slide into 6X on the Samsung. The Samsung can go all the way to 12X, whereas the Vivo maxes out at 10X. Try and get them lined up. Now back out to the mains. Now a quick nighttime stabilization test. This is walking along at a normal pace on the ultra wide, and here's a bit of a jog. Now main camera of each. This is a normal pace, and this is with a bit of a jog on. Now the 3x, which you should never really do in the dark, but here's 3x at a normal pace, and here's with a bit of a jog. Okay, back on everyone's favourite, the really dark street. We're on the cover selfie cameras again, so 1080p on the Vivo, 4K on the Samsung, and if you can see anything at all, let me know. Now we're on the interior selfie cameras, which is probably going to be worse, definitely going to be worse on the Samsung, but maybe not. Right now it actually doesn't look any worse. So yeah, last but not least, here's how it looks if you use the main cameras to film yourself in the dark. Looks a hell of a lot better, as you can see. I go somewhere a bit darker. Finally, here's the ultra wides when you're filming yourself in the dark. Here's the ultra wides of both phones when you're not filming yourself. Here's 1x. I'm walking along, pretty big lens flare there. I did just clean the lens, so that's pretty unavoidable. And finally, the 3x telephoto of each. Back to the main camera. So now we're going to look at some photos. We're starting off with this little crocheted guy again. Both of these photos are taken on the main lens. We've got the Samsung on the left and the Vivo on the right, as usual. Right off the bat, I see quite a difference in exposure. The Vivo has brightened everything up, whereas the Samsung's got a much darker image. Darker blues in the skies, richer greens in the grass. Everything looks a little washed out and a little, not overexposed, but it's a much brighter image on the Vivo. Samsung has a tendency to exaggerate colours, but it was a really bright sunny day, and I think it's actually done a better job with the colours here. Although I do like the brighter exposure on our subject. You can see in this case the Samsung is a lot sharper. Vivo looks a little soft, like maybe it missed focus and focused on another part of the frame. So yeah, I prefer the Vivo exposure. I like the shallower depth of field you get from the large sensor. But I think the Samsung has taken a better image here. Same scene, but this time we're on the telephoto 3x camera of each. Here, the Vivo is a bit contrastier. Samsung's got a bit more of a natural look. It's a little too much contrast for my taste on our subject there. So the Vivo has a larger telephoto sensor. I think it may have larger sensors across the board. And the result of that is that the background is a little softer with a larger, well, they would be bokeh balls, but it's a periscope lens, so they're kind of square. But you can see on the Samsung, it's a bit noisy and a bit busy, the bokeh. It doesn't look awful, but I do think the Vivo looks a little bit cleaner in that regard. Again, I think the greens of the grass are probably more accurate on the Samsung. The lack of contrast is better on the subject. So overall, I'd give this one to Samsung too. Now this is a shot comparing the ultra-wides for a close-up, and Samsung doesn't have autofocus on its ultra-wide lens, so you can't really use it for close-ups. As you can see, our subject's all blurry, background's completely in focus, whereas the Vivo does a good job. So if you like to use the ultra-wide for close-up shots, then you'll probably want to steer clear of the Z Fold 6. Okay, here's another ultra-wide shot, and with this scene of the church, just like in video, we're going to go through the whole zoom range as far as we can go. The ultra-wide was a lot wider in video mode, but in photo mode, it's not actually that significant. I don't think there's much in it. I think they're about the same width, but Samsung is able to use more of the sensor for video somehow. Much more contrasty and saturated image from the Samsung. Deep blues in the skies, very bright greens. This wall's very dark, whereas everything's been kind of evened out in the Vivo shot. The sky is paler than it was in real life, but there's a nice HDR effect. You can see all the details in this wall and in the church. As for which one's better, hard to say. I think that's just a matter of preference. I think the Vivo image is slightly more detailed. Samsung is very noisy. There's a lot of grain in the dark areas of the frame. And the Vivo is just slightly sharper overall. I think this grass looks a bit better, even if it is a little too pale. I'd give this one to the Vivo, personally. Now, same shot on the main cameras. Again, very bright greens and very dark blues on the Samsung. Slightly more washed out on the Vivo, and a bit of a blue tint to the shadow areas. Like the church looks very blue in this shot. Again, it's a matter of preference, which one looks better to you. I don't think either are exactly accurate to how I saw it with my eyes. That green is too bright. That blue tint is just a little odd. But let's see what the details look like. I think the Samsung shot is slightly sharper. I think it's slightly noisier, but it's nowhere near as bad as the ultra-wide shot was. You can see some noise in the dark areas here, but it's not bad. Yeah, I prefer the Samsung shot. I would tone the colours down a bit, but that's easy to do in whatever editing software you like to use. Now we're on the telephotos. The Vivo shot is slightly more zoomed in, but not by a huge amount. And it's definitely a hell of a lot sharper. Especially you can see it on the clock here, and you can see it on the brickwork around it. The brickwork is kind of lost, bit mushy. There's a bit of a lens flare going on here, and the lines here. The shutters on this window are very clean compared to the Samsung, which is a bit grainy, a bit soft. I'd say the Vivo telephoto does a much better job. Now these two are 10x shots, so obviously quite a big digital crop from the 3x telephoto sensors. Without zooming in, I can see a bit of chromatic aberration on the Samsung shot on this here and around the edge here. There's none of that fringing on the Vivo shot. Vivo looks sharper on the brickwork again. Samsung looks very soft overall. Let's zoom in and confirm. Yeah. Strange noise pattern. Even more aberration on the corners. The Vivo is much cleaner at this kind of zoom level. And that's something we're going to continue to see. 20 times zoom now. And, I mean, there's not much I need to say. We're going to keep seeing the same thing. Both are looking a little crusty at this focal length. But Vivo's much sharper, much more detailed. Samsung's looking really, it's really lacking colour and definition in this wall. Yeah, this is max zoom for the Z Fold 6, 30 times. And the Vivo can go further. Obviously, at this kind of zoom, neither are looking great, but we're seeing the same thing. Vivo's way sharper, way more detailed. The Z Fold 6 at this focal length kind of looks like a crusty old dash cam. It's no good. And if you really need to, you can go all the way to 100 times zoom on the Vivo. Obviously it doesn't look good, but it's further than Samsung can go. You can see the pixels. don't go to 100 times zoom. But if you really want to, you can. Just one more shot comparing the 30x lenses. This is of a horse in a field that was quite far away. I mean, it's plain to see the difference. There's a lot more detail on the Vivo shot. You can see the buckles on the, whatever this is called, fly sheet, I think, for the horse. Obviously, it's not great if you zoom in further. Like, neither have a ton of detail. But the Vivo image is cleaner. And, yeah, the Samsung's shot is very noisy. And there's that same chromatic aberration around the edge of our subject. These two shots are from the main lens. Macro close-up of this flower. The Samsung dynamic range looks a little better and a little more natural. Whereas on the Vivo shot, I can see there's like a bit of a haloing effect around this these petals in the background. And the sky is kind of an unusual shade of blue. It looked more like the blue on the left. Even though that might look exaggerated, that is how blue the sky was on this particular day. Obviously larger sensor on the Vivo, softer background, which does look nice. Definitely a little sharper on our subject. A lot of noise in the Samsung shot, especially in the shadows. That's a theme we're going to see throughout all these photos, I think. But it is quite a dramatic difference. Like, look at all the grain here. There's not really any of that on the Vivo shot. I kind of prefer the Vivo shot. I like the extra contrast. It kind of pops a bit more. But it's a shame the sky is a little odd. Okay, these two are on the telephotos of each. I did a better job with the framing on the Vivo, I think, so that does look nicer off the bat with that. There's more compression of the background, whereas there's a lot more of just the flower bed in the Samsung shot. So try not to let that distract you too much. Vivo's contrastier, more vibrant. The Samsung photo looks a little dull on the whole, and without zooming in I can already see that grain in the flower petals. And if I do zoom in, it's well grainy. Not sure why, because, I mean, it was the middle of a bright sunny day. You can see the Vivo is only at ISO 50. So, yeah, weirdly grainy image. There's no contest, really. I think the Vivo looks gorgeous by comparison. These purple flowers I used in my last comparison video. They're quite hard to photograph because it's such a vibrant shade of purple, and I think that has come through more on the Vivo shot. It looks bright in the Vivo shot, whereas it looks dark in the Samsung shot. It doesn't look like either have clipped the colors. Like they're both showing the whole color spectrum, but they're kind of rendering it differently. The Vivo looks better to me. Nice shallower depth of field. It is a little bit closer, but it's nice, that kind of foreground separation. And it's lovely and sharp around all these little bristles on the plant. The Samsung shot is not bad at all. There's a lot of detail. You can see all the little flecks of pollen on the flower. But it's noisy again. There's a lot of grain in the image. And it just looks a bit dull by comparison. That extra contrast has really helped Vivo out here. Okay, random shot of my girlfriend's horse. What can we tell from this one? Dynamic range looks good on both, but I like the horse's face is a little lighter on the Samsung shot. Vivo looks like it's gone a bit overboard with the sharpening, to be honest. It's a more natural shot on the Z Fold 6. Oh yeah, this grass looks way better on the Z Fold. Yeah, I wouldn't say there's much in it, but the dynamic range is better, and the sharpening looks nicer on the Samsung. Okay, this is a random pile of chopped wood on the main lens of each foldable. Samsung looking a little sharper, quite a bit sharper, on these little flakes of sawdust down here. Samsung's gone for a very cool color temperature. I think the Vivo is focused around here, and the Samsung might have focused around here. I think there's a slight difference in where they focused. Either way, both are very similar images. But the Samsung just looks a bit sharper on the whole, and I give it to them. Okay, these two selfies were taken on the cover selfie cameras, and at a glance, both look very good. Vivo stands out a bit more. The extra contrast really, it draws my eye more. I think the Samsung looks a little dull comparatively, but I can see that there's a lot of detail. It does look nice. The greens are way too green. That's very over the top. Much more natural colours on the Vivo. Very, very accurate colours in the sky, actually, as well. Whereas the sky's kind of... everything's a little washed out, and the greens are oversaturated. These photos have come out at different sizes. So both have great skin texture, lots of detail, very sharp. Even though there's no autofocus, they're both very sharp. A little bit of noise in the shadows on the Samsung, but nothing too bad. Yeah, both very good selfies, but the Vivo's a little bit better. Now these two are in portrait mode on the cover selfie camera. Without needing to zoom in, I can see that Samsung has done a brilliant job with the cutout, and Vivo's messed up a bit on my cheek, just around here. Yeah, it's not the best cutout on the Vivo. Both great skin texture, good skin tones, slightly better on the Vivo. Again, too green on this Samsung shot. The colours are the same as they were on the non-portrait mode shot. But yeah, better portrait mode cutout, worse colours, worse cutout on the Vivo, better colours. So these two selfies are on the interior cameras on the folding display. Obviously, Samsung doesn't recommend that you use that one for selfies. It's only 4 megapixel. It's an under-display selfie camera. And it looks like crap. So Samsung has to do loads of sharpening and processing to even get a usable image that doesn't look like there's Vaseline smeared all over the lens. But even then, I look grey and lifeless. There's a lot of noise. You can see a bit of like a crosshatch pattern, which is probably the pixels on the display. Texture of my skin's all weird. Whereas the Vivo interior camera specs match the ones on the outside. I do think it doesn't look as good most of the time. It's obviously a lot better than the Samsung, but I think the lack of having like a pane of glass over the lens, I don't know, something about it, it doesn't seem as sharp as the one on the outside. But yeah, it's the one on the inside. It's good enough for video calls, and it's definitely better than Samsung's, if you can live with a punch hole. Okay, these two are selfies using the rear cameras, which obviously is very easy to do with a foldable phone. They're both on the ultra-wide. Again, Vivo's ultra-wide has autofocus, Samsung's does not, but it doesn't seem to have affected things too much. However, Vivo's done a much better job exposing my face. It's really brightened it up. That's a much more flattering image. The Samsung's very dark because I was a bit backlit. The extreme greens, like a Windows XP wallpaper, and the dark blues in the sky. I do like the dark blues in the sky. So Vivo's sky is too light. Everything is a bit washed out. I'm not that pale, and the grass isn't that light of a green. But overall, it's just a much more pleasing image. Sharper, more detailed. Actually, nice bit of subtle bokeh in the background. Whereas the Samsung camera is more focused on the background than it is on my face. Not ideal for selfies. And if we switch to the main camera, we're seeing more of the same thing. Obviously, the Samsung shot looks a lot better than the last one because I am the focus of the frame and there's a nice bit of bokeh in the background. But Vivo's done a better job of exposing for my face, and it still looks sharper. Samsung's noisy in the shadows, noisy on my shirt. The Vivo shot's better for me. Now this is the same shot with portrait mode turned on. It has affected the colours for some reason. My skin tones are, I would say, spot on the Vivo there. But it's made the grass in the background very yellowy. Bit odd, almost looks like a wheat field. Samsung again, way too bright on the greens. Hasn't brought my face up. I look very shadowy, which I don't think is ideal for a selfie. And there's a lot of noise in my shirt. It's grainy down there. But what I like, Samsung always gets the portrait mode cutout spot on, and it's gone so far as to blur my shoulders slightly, which is what you would see using a proper mirrorless camera with a sensor big enough to make that background so blurry. That's a nice touch. I like that my shoulders are blurry. Vivo's a bit more simplistic. It's kept all of me sharp and made the background blurry, but it looks good, and I really like that it highlighted my face. It's overall just a much more pleasing image. So yeah, both good. Vivo better. Okay, nighttime photos now. I always like to get a shot with these LED screen tower things because it's a good test of the dynamic range, and right off the bat we can see a pretty big difference here. These are both the ultra-wides, so I'm expecting the Samsung to not be as sharp in the foreground. Vivo's kept the highlights reined in on all the LED screens. They're completely blown out on the Samsung. However, the background is much more well exposed on the Samsung shot, whereas the entire background is a shadowy area on the Vivo shot. Hard to decide on this one. I'm impressed that the the Vivo managed to capture all the colours on the LED wall. But I think as an overall image, despite blowing out the highlights, Samsung is better balanced. Main camera shot now. Bit of a red shift on the Samsung colours. Bit more greeny on the Vivo shot. The Churro van looks more accurate to my eyes on the Vivo. In reality, the colours are somewhere in between the two. Neither are exactly spot on. I kind of prefer the Vivo colours for this one. The sharpening of the Vivo isn't ideal. And on the Samsung, you just get lots of grain and noise, as we've seen in the day, but definitely worse at night. It's very noticeable on the back of this van, really grainy around there, and it's completely clean on the Vivo shot. In terms of detail, not really anything in it. You can just about read the sign on both shots. Yeah, pretty close. I'd give it to Vivo for the colours, but I don't really have a major preference. Same location, telephoto shots on each. The Samsung shot is super noisy, especially around here, really, really noisy, but it's sharper. I think there's some motion blur on the Vivo shot, probably some handshake. So it might be very grainy, but the Samsung shot is better. Close up of these plants on the main lens of each. Both looking pretty good, but quite different. Vivo's are much more contrasty, darker as a whole. This painted flower bed. The blacks are much darker on this Vivo shot, whereas everything's a little washed out on the Samsung. Very grainy from Samsung, very clean on the Vivo. That's much nicer. It's more in focus as well. Maybe Samsung has focused elsewhere. Doesn't look like it. Looks like they're both aimed for this leaf. And that's really sharp on the Vivo. A little soft and very noisy on the Samsung. Not even close. Vivo wins that one. This is another shot I like to get a lot recently because the way different phones handle the red lighting is quite interesting. Overall, I like the exposure from the Vivo a bit better. I like that the top of the building is brighter. But both look quite good. Samsung's just a little darker overall. Both have managed to make the text legible on this backlit sign above the entrance to Slim Chickens, which is impressive. That's not always the case. The text is cleaner on the Samsung shot, but it's very noisy. I think the noise reduction that Vivo is clearly doing kind of leaves a few artifacts behind. Both look pretty good. These red neon signs at the top are quite interesting as well. They always look different on different phones. Here, they're a bit orangey on the Vivo, and they're a bit pinky on the Samsung. In reality, they're red. In fact, this sign here is the same colour, and that's also washed out and become pink on the Samsung, whereas I think Vivo's done a better job. It's kept the accurate red colours here. So neither are perfect, but the Vivo image is cleaner overall, and it's done a better job with the colours, so I'd give it to Vivo. Okay, cheeky shot of a cheeky entrance to Cheeky Nando's. And, of course, Samsung is noisier. No news there. These are both on the main lens. Sharper text on Samsung, though. I think that's the trade-off, really, isn't it? You either get noise reduction and have a nice grain-free image, or you get sharp text, and it's quite difficult to have both. So overall exposure, pretty similar. A little bit lighter on the Vivo. There's barely anything in it. I kind of prefer the Vivo shot, but by a hair, it's like there's barely anything in that at all. This is a portrait mode shot of two very familiar mannequins taken on the rear main camera of each. Samsung, as always, has done a brilliant job with the portrait cutout. I like that it's chosen this guy as the subject and rolled off the focus the one in the back. Vivo's done that too, but to a lesser extent. Vivo's done a very good job on the cutout as well, but there is this one tiny error. I think that's a light in the background. Samsung's resolved that as a bokeh ball in the background, whereas it's kind of clipped into our guy's face here. Either way, minor detail. Both look really, really good. About the texture on this shirt, it's good on both. The Samsung almost looks better, but it has got this like moire effect on the shirt. And I think on the flip side, there are some very slight artifacts from sharpening or noise reduction on the Vivo shot. Both pretty close. Both look good. I love Samsung's portrait mode effects, how there are variances in the size and shape of the bokeh balls in the out-focus areas. That looks very authentic. Vivo's is good, but there's less variance. It looks slightly more artificial to my eyes. But yeah, both very good. Samsung's gone very cool in the colours. Vivo's a little warmer. Vivo's probably more accurate on the colours, I would say. It's hard to pick a winner. Probably leaning towards Samsung for this one. Same shot on the telephoto lens of each. Here the John Lewis logo reflection went over the top of this mannequin's head, which always causes issues. Samsung's done kind of a weird thing. The whole thing's blurred, but then Vivo's done a more distracting thing where half of it's blurred, half of it's not. Nothing against either of these phones. That's a very tricky thing to compensate for. Very warm colours with a bit of a green shift on the Vivo. Cold, contrasty image from the Samsung. Both look good. Shirt details are sharper on the Samsung. Slightly. Not a lot in it, but it is slightly sharper. There is actually a portrait mode error for once on the Samsung. Only a minor one. But I think Vivo has done a better job. Both look good, both have errors. Take your pick. These are on the main camera again. At a glance, both look good. I like the exposure a little better on the Vivo because you can see the bridge more clearly, and the underside of the bridge is nicely illuminated. It's a bit too dark at the top on the Samsung, but both look good. It's a matter of preference. I also like the kind of teal. It's kind of got a teal and orange thing going on the Vivo shot. Is that accurate? Maybe not, but it does look good. Same thing as always. Samsung is noisy, but maybe slightly sharper. Vivo's really clean, but the edges of the text look a little bit softer to me. Both are really good shots, but I like the Vivo, even though it's got a lens flare. And this is a telephoto shot from the same spot. Both look really nice at a glance. Vivo seems slightly contrastier, I think. It's very dark at the top left of the frame here. But I like that it's brought some warmth in, like the reflection on the bottom of the bridge here, whereas that hasn't come across as much on the Samsung shot. No doubt Samsung's going to be way grainier. Yes, indeed it is. And the text is more legible, as always. I prefer the Vivo shot, but I think the Samsung shot looks almost exactly as good. Okay, now time for some selfies with a human face, and that is my face. As always, the zoom levels are slightly different. At a glance, both look quite similar. Vivo's mirrored again, that's my fault. Vivo looks maybe slightly sharper around the eyes. There's not a lot in it. Samsung's noisier, as per usual. My facial hair looks more natural on the Samsung shot. Bit very weird and like image processed on the Vivo shot. The Vivo's pretty noisy too. The Vivo might be noisier. Nah, there's not a lot in it. Both pretty noisy. I prefer the Samsung shot at a glance. And yeah, the Samsung shot's better. It looks more detailed because it's not doing a weird image smoothing thing that the Vivo's doing. Same location, now with portrait mode turned on. As you can probably guess, Samsung's going to excel here. Really like the bokeh effects, all the variants and all the different colours and shapes and sizes of the bokeh balls in the background. Whereas Vivo's is a bit more, I mean, they're just circles. The cutout's more rough on the Vivo. My facial hair looks weird again. Samsung takes this one for me. Okay, now these two shots are taken on the extremely dark street that we saw in the video section. First thing I notice is the dynamic range of the Samsung shot. You can see the colour of the sky. It's a lot more saturated overall. The greens look more green. There's more vibrance to the colour of the bricks and the fencing over here. Vivo's definitely darker. Okay, neither are looking great when we zoom in and peep the details. Both are lacking detail, at least in the distance where this white car is, and that's a little overexposed over there. We come closer. Vivo is way sharper on this brick wall here, but there is a lot of image processing going on. Both did a decent effort, but Vivo looks better when you zoom in and look at the details. Exact same spot, this time on the ultra-wide lens. I believe both kicked into night mode because both have a pretty small sensor on their ultra-wides. We're seeing the same thing. Colour of the sky comes through on the Samsung. Very dark sky on the Vivo, which, to be fair, is what it looked like in real life. But a lot more saturation, a lot more vibrance to the whole of the Samsung image. It's all very washed out and grey on the Vivo. As for which one's more detailed, not really anything in it, I don't think. No, they're both a bit muddy. These very small sensors struggle in the dark. Now this is the telephotos of each from the exact same spot. As with the other times, dynamic range is better on the Samsung. You can see the colour of the sky, but it has really artificially brightened everything. What I could see with my eyes looks a lot more like the Vivo. It was very dark. That's why I was using that street. And if we zoom in, Samsung looks pretty terrible. There's some sharpness there, but it looks almost like pixelated. Whereas the Vivo is pretty soft, at least in the long end. Yeah, Vivo's too soft. Samsung's too sharp. I think the Vivo looks more natural, so that's the way I'm leaning, but I don't like the look of either of them, to be honest. One final bonus shot from the extremely dark street. Again, we're on the telephotos. I can see that Samsung has tried to brighten up the sky again. It looks pretty weird. Everything looks too bright on the Samsung, and everything looks washed out, and God knows what happened over here. Is that a bush? We've also got a pretty huge lens flare on the Samsung shot from that streetlight overhead. No contest. Look how clean the back of this car is on the Vivo shot. That is miles better. Yeah, not even close. The Vivo wins that one. Alright, I think that's about it for this one. Actually a much closer fight than I anticipated. I thought the Vivo was just going to run away with this, but the Samsung put up a good fight, even though it's not had a real camera hardware upgrade in like 2 years. The Vivo definitely excels when it comes to zoomed in shots, especially if you go past the telephoto zoom range, and it's a bit cleaner at night. The Samsung definitely has a noise problem. It has it in the day, but especially at night you get a lot of grain and noise in your shots, which isn't ideal. It does a really good job with portrait mode cutouts, and it has really nice portrait mode effects. A lot of the shots are comparable. A lot of the shots from the main camera look just as sharp as they do on the Vivo, despite it having a smaller sensor. Vivo tends to do a better job with exposing people's faces, but yeah, I don't know. It's not as clear cut as I thought it would be. Let me know in the comments what you think, which one you prefer, and I'll catch you in the next one. Toodles.